You really thought he loved you. He told me every detail about how you cried over the smallest things. I was the one who listened to him complain about your constant need for reassurance. And that family story you told me in confidence, I made sure it reached the principal's ears. The promotion was never yours to begin with. I handled that. Hi, my name is Emily Carter. I am 28 years old. If you have ever trusted someone with the parts of your life you kept hidden from everyone else, only to watch those same parts get turned into weapons drop support in the comments, I want to know I am not the only one who had to face this kind of cold, calculated betrayal. Jessica Lane had been in my life since our first semester of college. We both wanted to teach, and we both ended up at the same elementary school in our small Texas town. She was the outgoing one who could charm parents and administrators without effort. I was the one who stayed late to make sure every lesson plan was ready and every child felt seen. When she introduced me to Ryan Brooks at a quiet bar downtown, she framed it as doing me a favor. He was new in town, worked in software, and seemed steady in the way I had always told her I wanted. For a while, the three of us moved through the same small circles without friction. The first real shift happened on a Tuesday afternoon during dismissal. Jessica stopped by my classroom after the last bus left. She mentioned almost casually that Ryan had seemed distant the last time they grabbed coffee. She said it like she was looking out for me. I thanked her and went home. 2 weeks later, Ryan cancelled our Friday plans for the third time in a month, blaming a work deadline. When I told Jessica, she suggested I was asking too much of him. The words were gentle, but they landed like a quiet correction I was supposed to accept. I did not see the pattern until Ryan left his tablet on my kitchen table one evening. A notification flashed across the screen from an old email account. The preview showed Jessica's name and a subject line about managing the situation. I opened it without thinking. The thread went back 6 months. Jessica had written that I was too attached and that my family history made me high maintenance. She offered to create distance at school by speaking to the principal about my stress levels. She even outlined how she would position herself for the upcoming lead teacher opening, so Ryan would not have to worry about my career getting in the way of whatever they were planning. I printed the emails, folded the pages, and placed them in my bag. I did not cry. I simply sat at the table until the house grew dark. The next morning I taught second grade as usual. We worked on place value and I smiled when the children raised their hands. After school, I asked Ryan to meet me at the park near the school. He did not deny the emails. He said Jessica had been there for him when I was too much. He said the relationship had run its course. I asked about the promotion. He told me Jessica had already spoken with the principal and that my name was no longer under consideration. I walked away from the conversation without raising my voice. That night, Jessica appeared at my door. She walked in without waiting for an invitation and sat on the couch like the space still belonged to her. Then she delivered the 5 lines that stripped away whatever was left of the friendship I thought we had. I listened without interrupting. When she finished, she stood up, smoothed her skirt, and said she would see me at school the next day. The door closed behind her with a soft click. I sat in the same spot for a long time, the printed emails still in my bag. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the refrigerator. I did not feel the dramatic collapse people describe in stories like this. Instead, a clear, cold line formed in my mind. The person I had trusted most had spent months dismantling the pieces of my life I had shared only with her. The following week at school, I kept my routine. I arrived early, stayed late, and answered every parent email with the same measured tone I had always used. Laura Simmons, the fourth grade teacher across the hall, noticed the change. She stopped by during planning period and asked if everything was all right. I told her I was fine. She did not push, but she left a coffee on my desk the next morning anyway. Kevin Patel from the tech office also appeared more often than usual, fixing a projector in my room that had not needed fixing. He mentioned almost in passing that some old email archives had been recovered after a server update and that several staff accounts showed unusual login patterns from outside the building. I thanked him and filed the information away. Jessica continued her usual pattern. She smiled in the hallway, offered to share lesson plans, and made small comments in front of other teachers about how some people handled stress better than others. Each remark was delivered with the same detached calm she had used in my living room. I did not respond. I simply noted each one in a small notebook I kept in my desk drawer. The notebook was not for revenge, it was for clarity. I needed to see the pattern written out in my own handwriting before I decided what came next. One afternoon, Kevin stopped by again. He said he had found a set of deleted messages that had been archived during the server work. He asked if I wanted to see them. I told him yes. We met in the tech office after the students left. On the screen were additional threads between Jessica and Ryan, along with a few messages Jessica had sent to the principal's assistant. The language was careful, never explicit, but the intent was unmistakable. She had positioned herself as the concerned colleague while systematically undermining my standing. Kevin printed the pages without being asked and handed them to me in a plain folder. He did not offer advice. He simply said the files were now on a secure backup if anyone needed them later. That evening I sat on my back porch with the folder in my lap. The air was still warm from the day. I read through the new pages once, then again. The words were the same cold, practical sentences I had already seen. Nothing in them surprised me anymore. What surprised me was how little I felt. The anger I expected did not arrive. In its place was a quiet, steady decision. I would not beg for explanations. I would not try to repair what had already been broken on purpose. I would gather what I needed, protect what was left of my work, and walk away from both of them without looking back. The next morning, I requested a meeting with the principal. I brought the folder. I did not raise my voice or accuse anyone of anything dramatic. I simply placed the printed emails on her desk and asked that my name be removed from any future discussions about the lead teacher position. She read through the pages in silence. When she looked up, her expression was unreadable. She thanked me for bringing the information forward and said she would handle it from there. I left her office, walked back to my classroom, and finished the day's lessons as if nothing had changed. Jessica did not speak to me for the rest of the week. Ryan sent one text asking if we could talk. I did not answer. Laura continued leaving small gestures of support without asking questions. Kevin kept the tech office door open whenever I passed by a silent signal that the files remained available. I did not know yet what the principal would decide or how far Jessica's influence reached. I only knew that the version of my life I had built around that friendship was no longer available to me. The truth had already done its work. What came next would be whatever I chose to build in its place. The days after I left the folder on the principal's desk moved forward with a deliberate, almost mechanical rhythm. I arrived at school at the same time each morning, taught my lessons, answered parent emails, and left when the last child had gone. Jessica stopped speaking to me in the hallways. She no longer paused at my classroom door to ask about shared supplies or to suggest we grab lunch together. The absence was noticeable, but not dramatic. Other teachers began to sense the shift. Small conversations in the lounge grew quieter when I entered. I recorded each instance in the same notebook I had started after the first set of emails. The pages filled with dates, times, and exact phrases. I did not add commentary. I simply wrote what happened. Laura Simmons was the first to say something directly. She waited until the children had left for the day and found me still at my desk sorting papers. She closed the door behind her and sat in the chair across from me without asking. I heard Jessica in the lounge yesterday, she said. Her voice stayed even. She told two of the new teachers that you had been struggling with classroom management and that the principal was looking into it. She framed it as concern. Laura reached into her bag and pulled out her phone. She opened a notes app and turned the screen toward me. The text was a screenshot of a message Jessica had sent to another teacher earlier that week. The words were careful, but clear. Emily seems overwhelmed lately. I've tried to help, but she shuts people out. I worry about the kids in her room. I read the message once. Then I asked Laura if she had more. She nodded and scrolled to another screenshot. This one showed Jessica asking the same teacher not to include me in the planning for an upcoming field trip. The reason given was that I might not be reliable right now. Laura did not offer sympathy or advice. She simply said, I thought you should know. I've kept my own records since last year. Jessica has done this before with other people. She offered to send the screenshots to my school email if I wanted them. I told her yes. She left the room without another word. The door clicked shut behind her with the same quiet finality Jessica's door had made days earlier. Kevin Patel appeared in my classroom the following morning before the first bell. He carried a small external drive and asked if I had a minute. We stepped into the empty hallway. He explained that the server logs from the previous month showed repeated access to my personnel file from an account that was not mine or the principal's. The login times matched Jessica's usual planning period. He had already flagged the activity for the district's IT security team, but he wanted me to have a copy of the logs in case they became relevant. I thanked him and took the drive. He did not ask what I planned to do with it. He simply said the files were time-stamped and backed up on the secure server. Then he returned to the tech office. The pressure from Jessica did not stop with the lounge conversations. She began arriving early to staff meetings and choosing seats that left me isolated at the far end of the table. During one meeting about end-of-year assessments, she volunteered to lead a small working group and listed every name except mine. When the principal asked if anyone had been overlooked, Jessica smiled and said she had assumed I was already stretched thin. The principal made a note but did not correct the list. I sat with my hands folded on the table and said nothing. After the meeting ended, Jessica passed me in the hallway and spoke without slowing down. You should have stayed out of it, she said. Her tone was the same detached calm she had used in my living room. Now it's going to get messy for everyone. I went home that evening and opened the folder again. The original printed emails sat beside the new screenshots from Laura and the server logs from Kevin. I laid them out in chronological order on the kitchen table. The pattern was consistent. Jessica had started positioning herself months before Ryan and I had our first real argument. She had used small, repeated comments to create a record of my supposed instability. Each step had been documented in her own messages. I did not feel the sharp sting of betrayal anymore. What remained was a clear understanding of how systematically she had worked to remove me from the spaces I had once shared with her. Ryan sent another text 2 days later. He asked if we could meet somewhere neutral to talk about what had happened. I replied once and kept the message short. There's nothing left to discuss. He did not write back. I blocked his number after that. The action felt practical rather than emotional. I had already removed his contact from my phone's favourites list weeks earlier without realising I had done it. The principal called me into her office on a Thursday afternoon. She closed the door and asked me to sit. She had reviewed the materials I had given her and the additional files Kevin had submitted. She said the district would conduct a formal review of the login records and the messages Laura had provided. She also said Jessica had requested a meeting of her own and had asked that I be present. The principal set the date for the following Monday before the students arrived. She did not tell me what Jessica intended to say. She only asked if I would attend. I told her I would. That evening, Jessica sent me a single message. It appeared on my phone while I was grading papers at the kitchen table. The text was brief and carried the same cold precision as her earlier words. Monday morning, bring whatever you think you have. It won't change what the principal already knows about you. I read it twice, then deleted it without replying. I placed the phone face down and returned to the stack of student work in front of me. The house was quiet. Outside, the streetlights had begun to come on. I finished the last set of papers, packed my bag for the next day, and went to bed at the usual time. The weekend passed without further contact from Jessica or Ryan. Laura texted once on Saturday to ask if I needed anything for the meeting. I told her no. Kevin sent a short confirmation that the server logs remained intact on the secure drive. I spent Sunday morning on my back porch with the folder open beside me. I reviewed each page one final time, not because I expected new information, but because the act of reading them in order kept the facts clear in my mind. The truth had already done its work. What came next would depend on how the principal chose to respond and whether Jessica had prepared another move I had not yet seen. Monday morning arrived clear and ordinary. I parked in my usual spot and walked into the building before most of the other teachers. The hallways were still empty except for the low hum of the fluorescent lights. I placed my bag on my desk and sat down. The folder with the printed pages rested inside the top drawer. I did not open it. I simply waited for the meeting time the principal had set. Jessica had not arrived yet. Laura passed my door on her way to her own classroom and gave a small nod without stopping. Kevin's office light was already on down the hall. The building felt the same as it had every other Monday. Only the folder in the drawer marked any difference. At 8 o'clock, the principal's assistant appeared in my doorway. She said the meeting was ready. I picked up the folder, walked down the hallway, and stepped into the office without looking back. Jessica was already seated in one of the chairs facing the principal's desk. She did not turn when I entered. The principal gestured for me to take the remaining chair. She closed the door behind us. The room was quiet except for the soft click of the latch. Jessica kept her eyes on the principal. I kept mine on the folder in my lap. The meeting had begun, and whatever Jessica had prepared to say next would determine how far she was willing to push before the truth she had tried to bury finally surfaced in full. The principal opened the meeting by asking Jessica to state what she wanted to discuss. Jessica sat with her hands folded in her lap and spoke in the same even tone she had used in my living room. She said she had concerns about my ability to continue in the lead teacher role and that recent events had shown I was not handling professional pressure well. She mentioned my family history as context for why I might be struggling and suggested the school would be better served if I stepped back from additional responsibilities. She did not raise her voice. She presented it as a practical recommendation. I placed the folder on the desk between us. I opened it to the first page and explained that the emails documented a pattern that began months earlier. I read the dates aloud without adding interpretation. Jessica listened without changing expression. When I finished the first set, she responded that private conversations between friends had been taken out of context and that I had always had a tendency to see threats where none existed. She turned to the principal and said, "My reaction proved the very instability she had been trying to address quietly." The principal asked Jessica to respond to the server login records Kevin had provided. Jessica said anyone could have accessed those files and that the timestamps proved nothing about intent. She looked at me directly then and added that I had shared sensitive personal details with her over the years, and that those details now seemed to be colouring how I interpreted every professional interaction. The words were delivered without heat, as if she were simply stating an observed fact. I did not argue the point. I turned to the next page in the folder and showed the messages Laura had documented. Jessica's response was that Laura had her own reasons for aligning against her and that the screenshots could have been altered. She suggested the entire situation was being inflated because I had lost the relationship with Ryan and needed someone to blame. The principal made notes but did not interrupt. At that moment, the principal's phone lit up with an incoming email notification. She glanced at it, then asked if she could read something that had arrived overnight from a former colleague. She opened the message and read it aloud. Sophia Reyes, who had taught at the school 2 years earlier and left for another district, had written to say she had followed the recent changes and wanted to place on record that she had experienced a similar pattern with Jessica. Sophia described small exclusions, private conversations that later appeared in performance notes, and a gradual isolation that had contributed to her decision to transfer. She offered to speak directly if the district needed more information. The principal set the phone down and looked at Jessica. Jessica's posture remained straight, but the detached calm in her voice tightened slightly when she answered. She said Sophia had always been difficult to work with and that her departure had been mutual. She turned back to me and said I was now pulling in people who had nothing to do with the current situation to avoid taking responsibility for my own performance. The principal asked Jessica to wait outside for a moment. Jessica stood, smoothed her skirt, and left the room without looking at either of us. When the door closed, the principal turned to me and said the district would open a formal review. She also said she had already spoken with Helen Vargas from Human Resources, who would be joining the conversation shortly. Helen arrived a few minutes later with a printed copy of the server logs and a short statement from Kevin confirming the access patterns. Helen explained that the review would include interviews with other staff and that Jessica would be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome. She asked if I wanted to file a formal complaint. I told her I wanted the record to be accurate and that I would cooperate with whatever process was required. I did not ask for any specific outcome. After Helen left, the principal asked what I intended to do next. I told her I would continue teaching my current class through the end of the year and that I would apply for the lead teacher position when it was posted now that the record was clear. She nodded and said she would support the application based on my documented performance. I thanked her and stood to leave. She stopped me at the door and said she was sorry the situation had reached this point. I told her the truth had reached it on its own. Jessica was not in the hallway when I returned to my classroom. Laura appeared at my door during the first recess and asked how the meeting had gone. I told her the review was underway and that I had asked for the facts to be recorded. She nodded and said she had already submitted her own statement to Helen Vargas that morning. She did not press for details. She simply said the second grade team still needed someone to coordinate the science fair and asked if I was still willing. I told her yes. Kevin sent a short message later that afternoon confirming the logs had been preserved and that the district Shy T team had taken over the review. David Torres, a parent who had volunteered in my classroom earlier in the year, stopped by after school to drop off a book his daughter had finished. He mentioned in passing that Jessica had told him I was dealing with personal issues that might affect the class, and that he had found the comment odd because his daughter had never mentioned any problems. I thanked him for the book and said the class was running as usual. He left without asking further questions. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table with the folder closed in front of me. The pages inside no longer needed to be reviewed. The information had done what it was meant to do. Jessica's attempt to control the narrative had collapsed under the weight of the records she herself had created. Ryan had already removed himself from the picture. The professional circle that had once included both of them now operated without either of them at its center. I had not needed to raise my voice or demand punishment. The evidence had spoken in the same detached tone Jessica had used against me. I requested a transfer to another elementary school in the district 2 weeks later. The principal supported the request and wrote a strong recommendation that focused on my classroom results and professional conduct. The new school offered me the position before the end of the month. I accepted. The move was not an escape. It was a deliberate choice to begin again in an environment where the ledger Jessica had kept no longer existed. I packed my classroom materials on the final day of the school year without ceremony. Laura helped carry the last boxes to my car. She said the science fair had gone well and that the team would miss my coordination. I told her I would keep in touch and meant it. The new school year started in a building where no one knew the details of the previous spring. I introduced myself to my new second grade class on the first day and began the routines that had always grounded me. The lead teacher role at the old school went to another candidate after the review concluded. Jessica did not return to the building. The district investigation remained internal, but the outcome was that she was no longer considered for leadership positions in the immediate future. I did not follow the details. I had already let go of the need to track what happened to the person who had once been my closest friend. In the quiet months that followed, I rebuilt the parts of my life that had been tied to that friendship. I no longer measured my worth by how much I was willing to absorb or how carefully I managed other people's perceptions. The truth had revealed itself through the records Jessica had left behind, not through any dramatic confrontation I orchestrated. I had simply refused to carry the weight of her version of events any longer. That refusal had been enough. I still teach. I still plan lessons late into the evening when the house is quiet. I still keep a notebook, but now it contains only the names of my students and the small victories each day brings. The back porch remains empty of the conversations that once filled it. I do not miss them. The space they left has been filled with something simpler and more reliable, the knowledge that I can trust my own record of what happened, and that I no longer owe anyone an explanation for choosing to walk away from a friendship that had become a quiet campaign against me. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have never had to let go of someone you once trusted completely because the truth finally showed you who they really were, drop support in the comments. What choice did you make when you realized the friendship could not be saved?